Hi everyone, I'm Mello Santani, and I'm the co-creator of this game, Angeline Era, which is an action-adventure game coming out next year in the summer or spring or something. And this is another devlog update about the game. There is a free demo on Steam which you can play right now, and check it out and wishlist it if you like it. Try to get your favorite YouTuber or streamer to check it out. Yeah, it's a bump slash adventure where you walk into enemies to automatically attack them, and it's kind of non-linear. You can explore the world however you want. Very intriguing kind of world building and setting and lore and exploration. So please look forward to that. Bump the world is our slogan. Anyways, so let's talk about what happened this month in development. Uh, so the first thing is we worked a bit on the overworlds, which is kind of where you explore to enter all the levels of the game. And I wanted to talk a bit about the design process and philosophy of that and kind of like how we've progressed. So I have my first amazing PowerPoint slide. So if you look to the left, this is an old version of the world map. And if you haven't played Angeline Era, to enter each level, you have to search. There's a certain, like, the world map is split up into these little grid spots, and you have to search a suspicious spot to open up a level entrance. So the game does not work sort of like Mario, where it just shows you all of the entrances. And as you clear a level, it will sometimes change the terrain of the world map and open up new discoveries. That's the gist of it. So kind of how we've progressed on this design process is arriving at more of a style of abstraction to design the world maps. And I'll just start by describing the differences between these two styles of design. On the left is more of a realism style of world map design, which is it feels more like a place. It feels more like a level. So for example, what you're looking at in that image on the left is kind of like a small valley with like trees in there, and there's like a level there you can find. So that area around the level entrance, it actually kind of feels almost like you're seeing kind of a visual image of the level, but from the outside. And as a result, that whole area, the world map on the left, it doesn't really feel like a map. It feels more like kind of like a miniature diorama of sorts. And this is not undesirable, but it's not desirable for Angeline Era because there's just a lot of small levels in Angeline Era, and we actually want the game to be designed to have you overlook a lot of levels. And if we went with the more realism approach on the left, then I think that creates more of a sense of kind of having to see everything. It feels more checklisty, whereas if we design more with abstraction, so it feels more like a map on the right, then there's less of a sense of, oh, I need to see every single thing. Less of everything feeling like a landmark. And if you look on the right side, it's more abstracted. So what you're looking at here, the blue things are kind of level entrances that you would find by kind of like searching. And those would be more kind of like apparent in the final art. And the green things are terrain that appear after you clear some levels, and the orange things, those also vanish. I kind of forget off the top of my head. But the point here is that if you look on the right, it has a lot less height variation. Usually everything's flat on the ground. Sometimes we go 1 or 2 tiles up. And I think this helps the map read more as kind of like a map. And also because we're not worrying about having to use realistic terrain to convey like a particular style of forest or mountain, I think that lets the map be a lot tighter and denser. So it kind of, when you're playing and exploring this type of map on the right, you're more likely to kind of miss stuff and just kind of feel like like wandering a bit more, which is funny because actually the map on the right is a lot smaller than the map on the left. But that's important because we didn't want the whole world to kind of like take too long to walk across. And we don't want to have fast travel because, I don't know, fast travel, I like to avoid that as much as possible. Because it helps kind of, especially in Angeline era, we want to kind of embody the player within the world and the fiction of the world a lot more. So if we can avoid fast travel as much as possible, we can kind of preserve that that like physical connection to everything. So yeah, that hi again. That was sort of some of the thinking we're doing with the world map, and also just designing it the way on the right, more abstract. That's a lot easier to do an art pass around. It's also easier to kind of like prototype with debug art. Yeah, so there's a second thing about design I wanted to talk about, which is the concept of heat, which is sort of a concept we developed while creating bosses. It's not novel. I'm pretty sure it's not new because it's so related, you know, it's just so heat is inspired by rank in shoot 'em ups and probably rank in other arcade games. If you don't know what rank is, generally speaking, it's kind of like the better you play in a game, the harder the enemies get. But also sometimes the more valuable you can, the more higher score you can get. So I believe it's a way to kind of balance the game to stay interesting to people who want to play for a very long time. Like the depth of difficulty in games that use rank well tends to be very, very deep, almost like endless. So that's a really interesting idea, right? You know, the better you play, or just kind of like the difficulty shifting dynamically, which is also not, you know, a new concept. But the way I wanted to tie it into action bosses, so in Angeline era, we have, let me see if I can move this so you can see me. In Angeline era, we want the bosses to kind of feel a little more unpredictable in the way you fight them. So it's sort of like you can't just memorize the fact that it's going to use a certain move and dodge it. It's sort of like, it's not a bullet hell, but it is kind of like a shmup in the sense that you know that there's going to be certain types of attacks the bosses present you with, but you're just going to have to get good enough at reacting to them as they come out and kind of dealing with that chaos. Rather than like, oh, you know, this boss is going to use his like arm sweep attack, so I gotta like move this when that happens. And one way of accomplishing that, and this is not in the bosses in the demo because those bosses were earlier on. I still like, you know, those bosses in the demo, but those work for what they are, but they don't use any concept of heat, as I'm calling it. So heat in Angeline era is a number from 0 to 1, a floating point number. So decimal, I guess, in regular people speak. The number at the minimum is 0, and at the maximum it's 1. And 50% of that number comes from how much health the boss has left, and 50% of it comes from how long the fight has gone on. So heat will be higher when the boss has lower health, and heat will be higher when the fight has dragged on a longer time. So basically, the longer the fight has gone on and the lower the boss's health, the higher the heat value will be. And this affects things like kind of like the frequency of attacks. So, you know, some bosses might fire out like projectiles, and at higher heat, it'll fire more projectiles out before moving on to another attack. It might affect attack speed. So if, say, the boss is like following you around the stage, maybe it runs faster at higher speeds. It can affect move choice. So some bosses pick from different moves. But with heat, you know, I can weight them to pick more aggressive moves. as the higher the heat is. And what's nice about this is that it's a really simple way of just changing the behavior of the fight over time, without having to require on more complex AI structures. In fact, there is really no complex AI in any of the Angeline era bosses. They're all pretty simple state machines, which is what I prefer because, if I can't knock out a boss in maybe 6 to 8 hours of coding, then I think it's too complex. So I prefer if most of the boss's complexity is decided at the design stage, and then it's kind of easy to implement. And what's cool about this style of boss design is that it's not really routine and predictable. So if you play a Zelda boss, you play a Mario boss, you play a lot of simple action bosses, they tend to be very, you can kind of memorize them and be done. But we wanted something harder, or more, not harder necessarily, but just more interesting. So obviously it's not the first action game that's done bosses like this, but I think it's nice because it also lets you kind of make fewer moves for the bosses, because they're just being mixed up in different ways. They're moving around in different ways. So the movement of the boss is overlapping weirdly with the attacks it uses. And if that's overlapping with kind of the player performance, like how fast the fight's gone on and how much health is left. And what I like about Heat for Angeline era is that one of our guiding principles for designing bosses for it is kind of just, there should be no downtime when attacking the bosses, right? You should always be able to be more aggressive to do more damage. It's kind of you're playing tennis, right? You can't, a lot of 1v1 sports, you can't kind of just stand there with the ball and be like, I don't know what to do. You have to kind of just keep, fighting that back and forth. So I wanted to capture a bit of that dynamic with Angeline era's bosses. I also just hate waiting around to get one hit in or something. It's just, nothing says oh, the core action here doesn't really have much going on than resulting in waiting. I think it's also just a more inspiring way of doing bosses, right? Someone will play that, and because every boss feels kind of organic in this interesting way, I think that's more inspiring to not just designers but players, Yeah. So I think one day I'll talk a bit about kind of the design process of the bosses, but for now, this is a cool concept that you can think about and keep in mind when you're playing the final game next year. It also, one last thing is that it also goes really well hand in hand with difficulty levels. So Angeline era has 5 difficulty levels, and sometimes the difficulty levels don't really intersect with Heat very much, but they could, right, if you wanted to. But difficulty sometimes also adjusts move behaviors. So what I really like about this style of boss design is that if you design the moves and the movements around being able to adjust timings, adjust intensities, then it's really easy to kind of make different difficulties, right? The boss is just a little bit slower for easier difficulties, less attacks, that kind of thing. Yeah, so okay, lecture time is over, and now we're going to move on to just updates with the game. The first thing is that we have a Twitter for Angeline era. I'm never going to call it X. We have a Twitter and a Bluesky. So if you want to check that out, just check out my Twitter, or I'll put the links below as well. We're still going to be using Twitter, but there is it's big enough kind of following on Bluesky that we want to also be cross-posting there. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure if you use Twitter, you know what's going on. It sucks. So for Angeline era, the next thing, let's see. Okay, I'm going to try to remember to update this text file as I talk about things. So we've been working, well, in September, I finished the stores in the game, and most of the towns. And, you know, stores, that doesn't sound too remarkable, but if you've played the demo, the stores are kind of, they're very physical. You have to bump the items to buy them. And that gave me a lot of random ideas just of kind of funny ways to mix that up. Either like the placement of the store or like what you can buy at the store. Obviously, I'm not going to talk about those things, but it was fun to think of a lot of ways to kind of like shake up what a store usually is. And you see a little bit of that with like even games as early as like Link's Awakening or Dragon Quest II. I think Dragon Quest II has you like have to walk off to a weird store outside of the screen. Link's Awakening obviously has that great thief joke, which I can't believe the marketing for that game's remaster like spoiled it. Yeah, you know, there's just a lot of like funny things you can do when you decide that a game doesn't have to be the same thing over and over again. Yeah. So those have been fun. There's a few towns left, but like in particular, we finished the main town, Dublin. That was nice to finally figure out. So now, late game area design. What is that? Well, obviously, I'm not going to talk about it because it's a surprise. But there is something late in the game which has been on my back of my mind for a while. But we finally sat down and kind of like, you know, it's not designed out totally, but it's a lot more concrete to the point where I'm okay kind of not thinking about it for now because the scope is there, the art requirements are there, the music requirements are there. A lot of the coding requirements are sort of outlined, so I'm a lot less worried about that. You'll enjoy it when you see it in like 8 months, 7 months. New enemies and animations and NPC designs. If you look on our Twitters, we have posted some of the new enemies that we've gotten art in for, as well as the NPCs. This has been really nice. Marina's figuring out a lot of the character art style, which is great to be getting done as we go into that. So the regular enemies in the game have been done for quite a while. I think there's like 35, 45, no, like 30 to 40 types of enemies. I can't remember now. Plus a lot of little variations. I could talk about the coding for that someday, but not today. But that's been pretty straightforward to implement, actually. I was a little bit worried about how long it would take to code, to kind of like, so when you make an enemy, there's like multiple stages, right? You have to design the enemy. You have to code the enemy and then debug, usually. Then you have to use the enemy in a level, and usually that leads to you debugging or adjusting the design a bit more. It's like 4 or 5. And then you implement the art. And sometimes implementing the art, you realize there's certain like communication issues with the enemy and you have to adjust a little bit. But that's been okay. I think it really helps that these are kind of like low poly enemies so that we don't have to really make... There can be a little bit of jank in the animations and no one will notice it, which is nice. Yeah, so look forward to those. I'll talk about that afterwards. More music progress. If you look at my main Twitter, I have been posting some music drafts that I've been working on. Maybe also to SoundCloud, I can't remember. But yeah, that's been fun. I don't know. I like working on music. It's one of the more relaxing things to do on a game. Kind of because once you do it, it works. There's nothing, you don't have to worry about it like breaking in the game. I mean, unless you were doing dynamic music implementation, but I just don't really like that as much, so I like to loop it. But yeah, the music's coming out well. I don't know. It's fun to be good at something and do it, you know. What's okay? So what's next? Well, we have to, there's still more enemy art, and we'll implement that. There's sound effects for the enemies, there's boss art, sound effects for the bosses, so I'm gonna have to do a lot of sound effects at some point. Finishing up the overworlds, which I could do now, but I'm just busy with other stuff. More music. A lot of music left. Level art and cutscenes, that's another huge thing. There's a lot of levels in the game, and we have to do the art for them. But because we have that auto cuber tool where you place cubes, that makes life a lot easier. So, I don't know. Maybe there probably will be some way of me helping out Marina save time with that, because it is quite a lot of levels. But we also might cut out some levels that just like don't make the cut, because I don't think maybe some people might want a lot of levels in the game, but I think we can have fewer. Right now there's like, I don't know, maybe around 100 or so. They're not all action levels, but that is a lot of levels. The cutscenes, which I wasn't looking forward to doing, but actually now that I'm working on, I made this event editor like 2 years ago to make cutscenes for the game. It's inspired by RPG Maker, but it uses Unity's UI tools, and it works quite well. We did some stress testing with some test cutscenes a few months ago, and that helped develop a lot of usability tools. And I'm also using it right now to work on my other game, Danchi Days, and that's kind of made me realize that the types of cutscenes in Angeline Era are actually a bit simpler, because they don't really interact with a lot of like, kind of like game state, Danchi Days has a lot of items going into the inventory, talking to NPCs to start stuff, whereas Angeline Era's cutscenes are a lot more like you walk into a room, screen fades to black, and there's something plays for a bit and fades out, fades back in. So I actually don't think those will take as long as I had imagined, which is a good thing. Not that there's a lot of cutscenes in Angeline Era, but there are cutscenes. They'll be good. Last thing that's next is finishing up finishing up the search games. So if you play the demo, those are the things you do when you enter a level with like, dodging the bushes and stuff. So I have a bunch of those left to do. We already have the entities designed for that, so the new kind of like enemies and stuff. So I have to code those and then design like 80 of them. But those are really easy to design because they're just a list of numbers that represent which thing appear. So I don't know, that won't take too long. Maybe a week or less. And wrapping up, Danchi Days work. We have, so this is the other game. I mean, I would make a separate devlog for Danchi Days, but if you haven't heard of it yet, it's kind of this, it's like this adventure game set in a Japanese danchi, which is like a mass housing complex, and it's a lot. I'm working on it with other developers, and it has more of a cute kind of like Y2K Game Boy Advance art style. But it's inspired by a lot of those like offbeat Japanese adventure games, like your like Hamtaro, Moon, Uki Uki Carnival, Earthbound, a bunch of other ones. So if you're into any of those kinds of games, you probably will enjoy Danchi Days as well. So keep an eye out for that. We might have a demo on Steam this year. I don't know, probably, but we'll announce that as well. So yeah, so links to all of this in the description. Yeah, that was the past month and a half of Angeline Era. Yeah, I don't know, nothing. I'll probably think of more like design topics to talk about, but I think the updates will probably be pretty similar to this month's. It's just like finishing stuff and finishing art. I probably will be posting more art of the game once we're working on level art. So yeah. Anyways, if you want to support us, tell a friend about the game. tell your Discord servers about the game, and if they like it, they should go wishlist it or something. I don't know. I mean, there's only so much. It's kind of like game discoverability is a bit tricky nowadays, right? It's very kind of either the game's viral or it's not. AngEra is not really viral. It's more viral than our past games, but it's not the kind of thing to blow up on Twitter or YouTube or something. But I think we have enough kind of interest in the game to sell enough, so I'm not too worried. I'm more worried about just finishing the game in a reasonable amount of time. Yeah. But still, every wish list helps, so do tell your friends. Also, actually, one last update. Merch. We do have new merch coming. I guess I can announce it here. I mean, it's not that big of an announcement if you watched it here, but we have an Anodyne 1 t-shirt planned. We have something for Even the Ocean fans. That'll be kind of exciting, a physical thing that I've wanted to do for a very long time. And then what's the other thing? Oh, some stickers. The Anodyne 2 stickers. So we'll have some stickers for those of you who enjoy sticking. Will kind of look like this, but nicer. We have a better design idea for the Anodyne 2 ones. We're also not using these like glossy ones that like melt in the heat. Yeah, so Even the Ocean we'll have some postcards like this with art from the game, but kind of arranged to look nice, so it doesn't just look like a screenshot. I'm not gonna do that to you. Sell those kind of cheap art. The last thing is, well, this is not happening yet, but nobody is buying the PlayStation versions of Anodyne 2. So we're gonna discount these and have a bargain bin sale for them, so hopefully somebody buys them. However, the Switch versions, my shelf just fell down. The Switch versions, hopefully those sell pretty well. Oh, and I missed one merch thing, which was, I don't have it on my shelf, but what was it? Oh, the Anodyne 1 Fanbook. We're gonna reprint those. There's like a pretty big waiting list now, and they sold really well. So I'm gonna make like 300 so that we have enough forever. I hope. That's it. So if you like this video, please subscribe because that will help our sustainability as a truly independent studio. Goodbye. Touch grass, stay healthy, play Romancing Saga.